that with you this evening. Just a little, I won't go on too long, but I do want to share a few things. Firstly, let me just clear up some things with the names because it confuses people. The name of the organization is Deaf Ministries International, okay? Deaf Ministries International is a Christian mission group taking the gospel and employment and education to the deaf in developing countries where they're left completely unhelped by their own governments. Deaf Action is the secular aid and development arm of Deaf Ministries International, working to break the cycle of poverty and discrimination against the deaf around the world. So for those of it, Deaf Action, am I going too fast? Deaf Action is tax deductible, DMI is not tax deductible. If you want tax deduction, donate to Deaf Action. If you're more interested in ministry and you're not too worried about tax deduction, please consider DMI. I just wanted to clarify that before I moved on. I got involved with DMI 25 years ago, and there are two reasons for it. The first is I was so impressed with the work that they do, and the second was I was so impressed with the man who started it. And I was so impressed by both that I immediately, for 25 years I've been a supporter and more recently a worker with DMI. DMI began 40 years ago when Neville sponsored, through World Vision, a young deaf boy in Korea. Some years later he became a missionary to Korea, where within a few short years he established 13 deaf churches. And one of those in time would be pastored by that young boy that he first sponsored. Today, DMI has schools and churches and employment projects in countries all around the world, about 15 different countries. And we've got about 10 schools that we have either founded or we're heavily invested in. We've got dozens of employment projects, and we founded 180 churches for the deaf around the developing world. And this was all done, by and large, by one guy who just had a love for the deaf, and a love for the gospel, and a love for seeing their lot improve. These are just the numbers, and I just want to take a few more minutes to share with you two people that I've met who I think illustrate very well the work that DMI does. The first is a young girl called Kan Lun. I met her in Myanmar a couple of years ago. She was 13 at the time. For the first 12 years of her life, she went completely uneducated. She had no idea that there was a deaf school. So for those 12 years, she lived in a silent, frustrated, lonely world. She couldn't communicate with anyone. She had no education. She had no hope for her future. Then she found one of our schools. She started coming. And within that 1 year, she learned how to sign, how to learn. She learned how to learn. She made friends. She found a community. She found faith. And up until that she'd come to the school, she told me how much she hated being deaf. But since coming to the school, she told me that she now loves being deaf. Now, of course, I didn't believe her at all. I thought she was just telling me what I want to hear. And so I tested it. And I said, well, really? I said, if there was some miracle cure for deafness, surely you'd want that. And she said, absolutely not. And she explained, she said, because if I suddenly became hearing, I'd have to leave this school. And this is everything to me, this community. And so from that I learned a very important lesson, that Kan Lun's need for love far exceeds her need to hear. And that's something I've carried with me as I've gone from country to country and met all the kids and the staff and the workers at the schools and in the employment projects and in the churches. I'd like to share with you one other, a young man called Alan. Alan is the principal of our school in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, I don't know if you know much about Congo, but respectfully, it's a mess. It's one of the few countries that we're not allowed to go to because it's too dangerous. There in the Congo, they're still ongoing what's being described as the bloodiest warfare since World War II. Almost 5.5 million people have died, and 5.5 million people, and 50% of those are children under the age of 5. Okay? they're struggling with that. There have been ongoing struggles with Ebola. Of course, now they've got coronavirus, and all of that only exacerbates the poverty and the starvation that they have. Now, in the middle of all that, we have a school in a little town called Benny with a couple of dozen deaf students who will walk barefoot for miles for the privilege of getting an education. And Alan oversees this school and what the students are doing. And I interviewed Alan and I said to him, can you tell me a bit about your daily life? You know? And he looks at me like I must be the stupidest person in the world, right? And he says, really, you haven't got a clue, have you? He says, all right, I'll tell you. He said, look, 4 things, okay? 1, we've got serious security problems, okay? We've got no fence around the school. It's just bush. Rebels could come in from anywhere and just start macheting our kids. You know, it's that dangerous. He said, secondly, we have no secondary school here. The kids graduate from primary school, it's great, but then they don't really have much else to go on to, so they end up in very manual labor if they can find anything at all. We need a secondary school. He said, our salaries here, to be honest, he said, we're paid 1/4 of what the teachers at the local school are paid. And we have to struggle with that. We have a high teacher turnover because of that. And he said, frankly, because of Corona and Ebola and all the rest of it, we're hungry. He said, the kids here would be lucky if they got 1 decent meal a day. So he looked at me and he said, so if you want to know what my day's like, that's what my day's like. So they're the lives that we are trying to improve. Now, I want to illustrate what we're doing there. In the case of Congo last year, we raised the Food Emergency Fund. We were able to raise through the year $80,000, not only for Congo, but for all of the countries in Africa and Asia who are struggling with this. They don't have JobKeeper or JobSeeker or anything like that. So we immediately sent food, but what we're really working towards, and what we've developed last year, is what we call our Self-Sustainability Fund. And the purpose of this is to break the cycle of constantly requiring help. We want them to be self-sustained. We want them to be able to care for themselves. We want them to have dignity in that. And so through this fund, we've been developing a lot more. So yes, we provide the food, but then we also provided them with a lunch program. With that, one of the problems with that is that they started cooking outside. I got all these photos of it. One of the problems with cooking outside in Congo is tropical. Every second day they have a downpour, so they can't cook lunch. So we built a small kitchen for them so they could cook lunch. But to sustain them, on the school grounds, we help them to develop what we call a kitchen garden, so they can grow their own fruits and vegetables and so on to put in the school lunches. We're also able to buy for them a small farmland a little bit away from the school so that they can do what we've been doing in other schools over longer periods of time. Get the kids a good education that is practical and that they can learn how to farm and to make things. We can okay. We've got employment for our graduates to move on to, and we've got a profit from those jobs that are now coming back into the community, so they don't need as much support from us. So this is what we're working on through the Self-Sustainability Program. It's seen wonderful success in countries like the Philippines where we've been longer, but in a lot of the countries where we haven't been that long, there's a lot of work to do. I didn't turn the page. These projects have made a lasting difference in the lives of the deaf in developing countries. Our goal is to raise $100,000 over the next 5 years to support these programs that we're looking at doing. And I want to say thank you to you because tonight, through the ticket sales, we've been able to make over $10,000, which will go a long way towards that. But I also want to encourage you. We're looking for long-term partnerships to help us sustain and build and grow these projects. So I would like to ask you and encourage you to please think about how you might be able to support us. Come and speak with me afterwards. Please don't leave without taking an information package on the table. And I'd love to talk with you more about how you can help with these projects. I think that's quite enough. I'll leave it there, and I'm going to ask David to come back and introduce our guest speaker.